Hello, I'm Jasper Judd, Bramble's Head of Innovation. One of the challenges that established organisations often face when introducing new things is dealing with uncertainty. For example, when introducing a new service, we may need to learn about customer appetite, about pricing, about the cost of delivery, about how to go to market. Over the last 12 months in Brambles, we've introduced something called discovery-driven planning. Discovery-driven planning is an approach to embracing risk and dealing with uncertainty. For example, all of the projects that have been presented to the Innovation Fund and Board have been explored using this approach, discovery-driven planning. Recently, Rob Spencer, Bramble's Innovation Programme Director, met up with Alex van Putten, who is a professor at Wharton Business School and an expert in discovery-driven planning. And we taped their conversation.
So Alex, why is it important for companies to innovate and grow?
Well, a couple of reasons, Rob. One is that for companies to grow beyond the GDP rate that the world's experiencing now, about 3%, they need to do things that are different, or else you're just going to grow a trend, which is not going to get you the stock valuation that you really want. So you need to do something that's different and go beyond that. Secondarily, if companies are slow growers, statistically, they usually face a very uncertain future. A number of studies have indicated that.
So what stops big companies be more innovative?
Yeah, I hate to use the word culture because it's so overused, but basically that's what the research shows is the problem in most organizations. And I think of culture as not, people talk about it as though it's a thing. And it's not a thing, it's a collection of behaviors inside the organization from the management team and from the others. So it's really the behavior of how they relate to risk and uncertainty and how failure is treated to a large measure.
But it's difficult, isn't it? Because uncertainty is something that traditionally, when you're running a business, you try to avoid. So how can we actually manage? You talk about managing uncertainty. How can we do that?
Right. Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is that some companies have set up separate divisions to sort of be the innovation board, and that's what you have in your organization, which is great. Another way to think about it is to keep the cost of failure very low. So the process that we have been using inside CHEP and Brambles is one of experimentation, more or less, where a little bit of money is put at risk to learn about the key uncertainties that you're facing, and then if it fails, it's not a big loss. So companies, we found, can easily tolerate a defined small loss, and so we talk in terms of managing the cost of failure, not the rate of failure. So as you innovate, you're going to have lots of things that don't work out, but if they're low cost, no one's hurt. And so that starts to loosen up the behaviors inside the organization. Managers become more agile at decision making, and decisions are pushed further down the organization.
So tell us about the discovery-driven planning process.
Well, the discovery-driven planning process was put together about 10 years ago. We started working on this and thinking about where innovation goes off the tracks inside large companies. And we realized that the big problem was dealing with uncertainty and the behaviors around uncertainty. So we tried to come up with a way that basically, in many ways, mimics what venture capitalists do intuitively. And we sort of turned into a process that we now are able to bring into larger organizations, because the intuition doesn't work inside a big company, obviously. It works in a partnership with 10 guys, but not in a big organization. So, and the process is simple. It's just very powerful in that we ask people to think about what they don't know. So the basic rule is if you are making more assumptions than you have facts, then it's a signal you have to plan to learn before you plan to do. So acknowledge the fact you don't know what you're doing, and embrace that, and then think about the assumptions you're making, write those down in a simple way, and then design tests that turn those assumptions into facts. And the hard part is you got to remember to go back and revisit the assumptions you made in the beginning, so you find out if you're on track or off track. And then if you're off track, you have a meeting, you say, it's not working out, let's go do something else. Or if you're on track, terrific, you go on to the next learning. So it's a staged learning process that we put together that's pretty easy to follow.
And so how do we make assumptions about things that we effectively really know very little about? How would you recommend we approach that?
Well, I often have people say, I have no idea what the assumption should be. So first of all, if it's an assumption, it's a range, it's not a point forecast. If you tell me I'm making an assumption about something, you can't tell me the numbers for, because then it's a fact. So if it's an assumption, first of all, you have to talk in terms of ranges. So you can say, it's between 1 and 6, most likely 4, that's fine. So if they look completely astonished and say, I have no idea, you start to move them in as it's between 0 and 1 million. Well, yeah, of course it is. Well, is it between 0 and 500,000? Well, obviously. And so you sort of bracket them down there to something that kind of gets the sense of reality. But the point is, you don't have to be exact about it because it's an assumption range. So the trick is, how do I learn if that assumption is right or not? So we're trying to forestall decision making inside the organization until a point when the uncertainties have been stripped out. And then we can make a solid decision as to whether or not you should commercialize something.
So what do we do once we've made our assumptions and we're happy with our list and we've put some ranges around them? What do we then do with that?
Well, then you're going to really be asking yourself, in the process that we talk about, we do sort of what we call a sensitivity analysis to it to see what the most important assumptions are. And then we design a plan that says, how do I answer those assumptions? And you sort of go down in the row of importance. So if my biggest assumption is market price, for instance, which it often is, how do you find out about that? Do you do a prototype as you described earlier and go out and ask customers, would you pay for this? Or do you do a survey, or do you hire McKinsey, or whatever it is? But what do you start the process off by defining how the learning plan will unfold.
And presumably some of those actions you can put together can be very cheap. I mean, I guess when you start thinking in this form and putting a discovery-driven plan together, some questions come out which you can answer reasonably easily, either with a phone call or talking to someone you know who knows an answer to that particular question as well, I guess, which helps the principle of spending a little to learn a lot.
Yeah, I think that's always the challenge for managers, is to sort of kick the team back out of your office and say, learn faster, learn cheaper. I had one instance where I was working with a company and they said, well, what's a McKinsey study cost? I said, I have no idea, I guess $500,000. And so they said, okay, we'll put that down as our first learning. And I said, well, couldn't you go and talk to 5 customers, get in a cab and drive around? Well, yeah, we could do that. So why don't you do that first? And if all 5 customers say, it's a terrible idea, I don't want it, then why spend the $500,000 on the McKinsey study, for instance? So it's just a little bit, we talk about spending imagination before you spend money. So one of our clients has a great way of putting it. He says, never lead with an expense. So he always tells his guys, bring back the purchase order, describe it to the customer, get a purchase order, then we'll spend the money to develop the product. So that's kind of what we think is a good way to go.